I would like to introduce my wife, and she's the co-founder of this registry. She and Dr. Bill Doherty started it back in 2005 as a resource for couples and individuals to find a competent and experienced therapist in their area. And she works full-time at Pepperdine University. She's the manager of clinical training and professional development for about 30 years now. And prior to her life in mental health, she was a national director of sales and marketing for a nationwide company. So she's got a lot of experience, and she is Kathleen Winger. Kay is what we affectionately call her. So you'll go ahead and introduce our speaker, honey.
Sure. Hi. Well, thank you and welcome everyone. It's really great to have you. We had so many people that signed up for this webinar because of Susan Heitler's notoriety and being an international speaker. So we decided to set it up in this format because trying to have everyone visible, which is exciting, can also be a little bit hard to manage. I'm happy that you're with us today. This will be recorded. And so again, as Robert said, we certainly would love to have questions on the chat down below on your screen. Also, if you have any ideas for future seminars that you would like to have, we would love to hear as Susan's presenting just a little bit on a topic that you might like to hear about. Our registry, when we founded it back in 2005, it was with the purpose of helping couples nationwide to find a competent, trusted therapist to help them with their relationship. And we've done a very, very good job in helping thousands and thousands of couples through your help as the good therapist on board the registry. But we also want it to be more than just a resource for couples to find you, but to also, as therapists, we want to be connected to one another. So having these forums, having these trainings by experts in our field that are free, that we offer on a monthly basis has been something that's really been, many people will just sign up on the registry to participate and then to communicate with one another. So it's great to have you here today. I'm going to go ahead because time is limited. I want to introduce Susan Heitler, who is actually, Susan, you are over in, where are you now? You're not in Jerusalem.
I'm in Israel.
Israel, right. So I'm so thrilled with technology and how clear you're coming in. I think you're even clearer than I am here in the States. But I've known Susan for many years. She's been a longstanding member of the National Registry of Marriage-Friendly Therapists, probably way back when we started back in 2005. She's a graduate of Harvard University and NYU. She's a clinical psychologist, and she does practice when she's here in Denver, Colorado. Dr. Heitler is best known in the therapy community for bringing understandings of conflict resolution to the professional literature on psychotherapy. And she has authored multiple self-help books for therapists and also for the general public. Some of the books, Prescriptions Without Pills, for the relief from depression, anxiety, and more. David Decides About Thumb Sucking, which is something I'm going to read about since my little nephew is struggling with that right now. From Conflict to Resolution, which is really going to be the topic of what Susan will be emphasizing today. The Power of Two and the Power of Two workbook, which are great resources for therapists to use. So I really recommend that you take a peek at those books and refer to them. The Power of Two Marriage.com. So I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Susan. Susan, again, thank you for your time today being on this and teaching us about some of the important aspects of conflict resolution and couples therapy.
Thank you so much for inviting me and welcoming me here, Robert and Kay and Francis as well. I'd like to start with a little bit of a backwards-looking perspective. It's hard for me to believe, but it was probably 50 years ago when I was in the beginning of graduate school at NYU in clinical psych, Paul Wachtel taught the basic therapy course. Early in the course, he said, "What's this business of psychotherapy?" And of course, I went blank. He said, "It's about helping couples, individuals." But no, I take that back. Couples therapy didn't exist then. It's about helping people to resolve their conflicts. And I thought, oh, that's nice and clear. I love that. The difficulty was that no one in the rest of that course or in the rest of my training talked at all about how people actually resolve conflicts. So that troubled me. Finally, in my last year of internship, I had babies during my internship, so I actually was an intern for 3 years. In the last year, somebody from the field of industrial psychology came and presented to our internship group. He talked about conflict resolution in business, and I was stunned. There are really people who are talking about this? Sometime after that, the book Getting to Yes came out. Roger Fisher and William Ury, U-R-Y. That book was pivotal for the world. It's a book that they said that Gorbachev, who was then the head of the Soviet Union, used to carry in his back pocket. They say that that book brought down the Iron Curtain. So certainly, if learning about conflict resolution could bring down the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union, and raise up at least a little more independence for all the countries in the Union, certainly within families, understandings of conflict resolution, and also within our own personal lives, understandings of conflict resolution and how to do it in a collaborative way can make a massive difference. So that's our topic. That's the pep talk for today and the historical background. In any case, I kept obsessing about this business of conflict resolution and eventually trying to apply Fisher and Ury's ideas about positional bargaining versus interest-based bargaining. I realized, number one, this language does not work for the field of psychotherapy or for addressing personal issues. Interest-based bargaining is just not part of our normal vocabulary. In addition, I was seeing more and more how critical guiding the process of conflict resolution was to what I was by this time doing as a therapist. So I wrote the book From Conflict to Resolution. Pretty much all of what we're going to be talking about today is from that book. That came out in 1990 and was for therapy professionals. Then 10 years later, I wrote a book on the communication skills that people need in order to be effective at conflict resolution. You know, you can have a car and a map of where you want to go, but if you don't know the basic rules of the road for safe driving, you're not going to get where you want to go, at least not in a consistent way. So communication skills are like the skills for driving in order to follow the map that we're going to do right now, as a matter of fact. The map of conflict resolution. I'm going to draw it. It's pretty simple. Before I draw it, I'm going to just add one more important concept. What do we mean by conflict? So usually, what do you think of? What words come to mind? Probably fighting, arguing. Something just dropped here. It's okay. Fighting, arguing, that's one aspect of conflict. Sometimes conflict doesn't have anger and overt fighting. I'm using the term in the broader sense. Anytime X versus Y is going on, or for that matter, anytime there's a problem to solve, I could do this, I could do that. That's part of what I'm defining as conflict. In fact, the process of collaborative conflict resolution is identical to the process of problem solving. The only difference is we call it conflict resolution if there's been some sparks, And we call it shared problem solving if people from the outset are collaborative. Having said that, let's look at the map. I'm going to draw it right now. It's that simple. What do you see here? Is that visible, Robert? Can people see that fine? Okay. I can't hear you, Robert. No, still not hearing you.
All right, there we go. Yes, I can see it.
Good. Excellent. Okay. This is two elements in conflict. Let's make some angry lines in the middle, although it doesn't have to be angry, remember. As soon as X versus Y happens, in other words, if I say turn up the volume and you say, gee, I really don't want to turn up the volume. I'm not, Robert, asking you to turn up the volume, by the way.
All right.
We have already a conflict. I want X, you want not X, or I want X and you want Y. Technically, that's a conflict. Sometimes we can call it a conflict if we just state the problem without initial, what Fisher and Uri called positions, or what I'm calling potential plans of action. So for instance, we could just say, look, we have a problem with volume. What shall we do about volume? That's defining the conflict just in terms of what the bump is, the dilemma. So in psychotherapy, how do you know when you've hit a conflict? This is your first task in conflict resolution, is to recognize when you've hit what in general terms I call a bump. As a matter of fact, if you jot down the term bump theory, if you want a review of what we've talked about today, Google bump theory, and you'll get an article I wrote for one of the APA divisions on what we're talking about today. Bump theory, or how to resolve a conflict and when to resolve it. Okay, so what's a bump? A bump is a problem, an issue, a dilemma. What are some other words for what we work on? An argument, an upset. All of those are resolvable by using this same map. How do you know when there is one? Well, we usually feel it in our gut, there's some tension, or sometimes we just feel confused or anxious, or for whatever reason, when X is against Y, or X versus not Y, or a problem to solve. What I'm hoping your mind will click is, oh, conflict resolution, time for the win-win waltz. That's my pet name for the process we're going to be doing. A waltz has 3 steps. Conflict resolution has 4 steps. And the first step is to recognize when there is a conflict moment, a problem, a dilemma moment. Okay, we've done step 1. We've recognized. So for instance, I'm working with a group of individual therapists who are learning to do couple therapy. So one of the therapists in the group the other day, I'll make up a name, I'll call her Gail, said, oof, I got a new referral, and the woman said she wanted to come to me for individual therapy. And I did what you, Dr. Heitler, have told me to do. I asked, are you married or single? She said, I'm married and I'm having a terrible time with my husband. So one of the principles I'd like to suggest to you is that if you're going to be effective in therapy in general and in conflict resolution, you need both parties there. So her first thought was, oh, it's important you bring your husband to the session as well. The woman said, no, I want therapy just for me. Hopefully your mind is clicking, conflict, I caught it, that's a conflict. Now, simultaneous to the conflict between Gail and her client, Gail was aware, oh no, I have an inner conflict. I know Dr. Heitler said it's important that they come in as a couple. And at the same time, part of me doesn't want them to come in as a couple because I've never done this before. I've been a therapist for 10 years and I'm very confident generally in my ability. And right now I feel like a new intern. This is something new to have 2 people in the room at once, partners who are having problems and even fighting. So I don't know, do I want her to come? Do I not want? So one of the characteristics of conflict is often it's going on in three realms. It's going on between people, within someone. In this case, often the third realm was between the people and an outside factor, i.e. money. Really, she realized right away, the husband needs some individual therapy, the wife needs some individual therapy, and they need joint therapy. And she's learned from me, and I have a paper on this, that it's very important that it be one therapist for all three aspects of treatment. If you want to read that paper, go to ResearchGate and on the ethics of treating married people. Okay, having said that, so now we've identified that when you're noting a conflict, it's helpful to be aware that there's three potential realms in which it's taking place. What do you do once you realize there's a conflict? No need to panic. What you do is go to step 2. Step 2 looks like this. See this tall, thin rectangle? That represents dropping down a level from what I want to do and what you want to do to looking at what are my underlying concerns and what are your underlying concerns. Now, there's something a little strange here. How many boxes at step 1? What you want and what I want. 2. How many boxes in step 2? Exploration of underlying concerns. Well, we can all count to 1. 1 box. That means my concerns and your concerns all go as bullet points in one line. This is by contrast with when people do the pros and cons when they're making a decision, or your concerns versus my concerns. That's a setup for an adversarial interaction. Instead, what are the concerns underlying my preference? What are the concerns underlying your preference? They all go on one list. Now, once we've stopped the tug of war, or what positional bargaining is what Fisher and Uri called it, we'll just call it a tug of war between initial plans of action. Once we've dropped down to explore both people's underlying concerns, and we're now listing them both in one list, we've switched from being adversaries to being collaborative. If we haven't, if this tone is still negative, we got to clean up the tone. Take a deep breath, shed the anger, and go into collaborative mode. All right, there's a step 3. Here's step 3. So we had the initial plans of action and clarifying, oh, there's a conflict here. And then dropping down, what are the concerns underlying your preference and your preference? And once we've got a list of all the underlying concerns, then we begin solution building, creating not just a solution, but a solution set. Not just, well, shall we do your plan or my plan? Rather, a set of actions that are responsive to all the underlying concerns. So we're no longer fighting about your way versus my way. We're looking for a creative solution responsive to all the concerns. Now, if I had a little artistry here that looks like eyebrows, can you see it looks kind of like a face? So a good way to remember this is these 2 boxes are kind of like eyes, and then there's kind of a nose, and there's kind of a large, hopefully, smile. The initial positions, the underlying concerns, and then building a solution set responsive to all the concerns of both people. I'm being repetitive, and that's purposive, to get these phrases in your mind so that when you're working with clients, you can explain to them as well. That's the basic map. Now that's pretty theoretical. Let's see how it works in real life. I'm looking at my notes. I'm going to give you a very simple example first. It turns out that, and I'm going to turn Gail's client into a composite client of several of the cases we've been tracking in that group. I'm going to call them Jody and John. So it turns out when Jody and John did come into therapy, they had, had a big fight the night before. What did they fight about? When John came home from work, he kind of collapsed in the big armchair. Jody said, "Hey, get up, let's go out for dinner." John said, "Oh, I don't want to." How is that going to turn into a fight? Easily. Her sensitivities, you never want to do anything I want to do. His saying, look, da, 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 da. So what's the therapist's job? Number one, get rid of the anger. Okay, take a deep breath, each of you. If you're angry, you're just going to argue for your way, no, your way. This process doesn't work in anger any more than you can drive a car through mud or a flood or heavy snow or whatever. It doesn't work. It stalls. So as they calm down, take a deep breath. She's going to guide and find out, well, what are your underlying concerns, John, for which you want to stay home? He says, oh, I'm really tired and I'm even getting kind of a sore throat. So going out does not sound appealing. And Jody, what are your underlying concerns that you want to go out? She says, number one, I didn't make anything for dinner. Number two, there's really nothing in the refrigerator I want to eat. And number three, it seems like I almost never have time with you, just the two of us. And while the children are at their grandparents tonight, I'd love to have the time with just you and at a beautiful place. So now we have all their underlying concerns. Now Jody and John can each move into step 3. What can each of them offer toward the solution? John says, well, I understand that you want some nice time with me and there's no food here. How about if I call our favorite restaurant and ask them to deliver food? Something in these times of COVID that we may all be quite familiar with. At the same time, Jody is looking at what she can offer towards solution. And she says, well, if you arrange for the food to come here, I'm going to make arrangements so it's a really nice space. I'm going to find some candles, fix the lighting. How about if I rub your back a little after you make that phone call for the food? Now let's look at what happened. They have a plan of action responsive to all the underlying concerns, made collaboratively. It was as if the two of them switched from fighting to sitting down on the same side of the table vis-a-vis the problem. What was the problem? What to do about dinner? So they collaboratively came up with a solution that's in fact far better than what either of them had thought of from the outset. They didn't have to go out in the cold, da-da-da-da. Got the pattern? Any questions so far? That's the basic pattern. Okay, so now let's look at errors therapists are likely to make in trying to use this conflict resolution pattern. I'm going to go, there are many potential mini mistakes, fortunately all correctable. The most common ones are 1 at stage 1, 2 at stage 2, and 3 at stage 3. By the way, it's not only the win-win waltz that has 3 steps or the realms of conflict that has 3. I must love the number 3 because we're doing a lot of 3s today. mistake number one, people don't realize when they're in a moment that needs the win-win waltz. So for instance, I'm just trying to think who this was. Oh, a former client of mine, and it's kind of funny, this is the world we live in, who lives in Czech Republic, but somehow figured out who I was from Psychology Today blog posts or something like that. In any case, she began doing therapy with me when I was back in Denver. And then it was successful, we were all done. And then I got a call, and by this point I was in Israel, saying, I'm desperate, please, Dr. Heitler, can you work with me again? So I said, sure, what happened? She said, I tried going to another therapist because I've been thinking of breaking up with my boyfriend, but I love him, but I feel like I need to break up with him. And the other therapist told me, well, clearly you should break up with him. He's not over his first marriage. His first marriage was with a wonderful woman who died. He's talking about her all the time. Clearly, you just have to leave. What's the mistake the therapist made? I'm used to working directly with people. I wish I could hear you all. This should be pretty simple. The mistake is it's not for us to tell clients what to do. That's for sure. They live in their lives. We don't. They know their concerns, and they're the ones that can come up with the best solution. So she didn't click that, oh, this woman has a conflict. I need to switch levels and find out her underlying concerns. So mistake number one, not identifying, oh, conflict, let's switch from the battle back and forth, leave him, stay, to clarifying the underlying concerns. So what were the underlying concerns? And she loved this man. He's so special. We share so much. That's on the side of stay. And in the same column, and at the same time, he won't take off his wedding ring. I've asked him so many times to take off his wedding ring, and he won't do it. He still talks about his wife. He loved her so much. She was so special. And eventually the last concern came out, which was, I'm afraid if he loves her so much that he'll never just focus on me. It will be almost like being married to someone who's having an affair. There's always this other person. We may come back to this later, I'll see. In any case, once she went through all the concerns, I asked her, okay, what might be a solution that's responsive to all those concerns? She herself came up with the solution once we did some, what I call a depth dive on that fear she had that he'd always be connected with someone else instead of with her. I'll talk later about the depth dive. No, I take that back. We went more deeply into that fear. Close your eyes, I said to her, and where is that feeling in your body of that fear? And she identified the fear. And then when earlier in your life have you had a similar fear? And she said, oh, when I saw my first husband, I saw little signs that maybe he was involved with someone else. And then I realized in the whole marriage, he'd never really been there with me. He was always having affairs. So we by doing a depth dive, we were able to see, and sometimes the depth dive will go back to family of origin more often. In this case, it went back to a long ago first marriage that she had had. So when the issue is what shall we eat for dinner, or what should we do about dinner, it's usually mostly here and now factors that go into this list. As therapists, we usually get the issues that have deeper issues. So even if it seems trivial on the top, what should we do for dinner? Actually, one of the people's deeper issues was, does what I want really matter? And that deeper issue came from having grown up in a family where what she wanted had no impact whatsoever. What she said was always negated, particularly by some people in the family. So you have the idea how kind of psychodynamic looking backwards is an important part of this process if it's a deeper issue. There's actually a term for looking back at those deeper issues. A researcher named Lester Luborsky coined a wonderful term, core concerns. I love it because he was using the word concerns. Excuse me, I had something for dinner. It's nighttime here. That's making me burp. I apologize for that. Whatever. So his notion of core concerns is that issues that come up again and again, like, oh, he'll leave me, or, oh, he doesn't listen to me. Those repeated issues, core concerns, usually you have to find out where they came from earlier in life. Now, in the book, From Conflict to Resolution, I describe that process of doing a quick dive down into the past and coming back up as a depth dive. In junior life saving, we learned about surface diving. You swim on the surface until you see something that's a problem at the bottom of the pool. You bend at your waist and you go straight down, pick up exactly what you need, bring that up to consciousness in this case, and then move forward. So this is a technique for doing mini psychodynamic explorations to get exactly what you need from the depths of their pure personal history, bring it up and use it to help them in resolving the conflict. More recently, I've called it by a different name because I've been writing for the general public. I call it, that was then, this is now. Once you reach down and pick up the core issue and where the source was, you lift it up and you ask, oh, what was the same that reminded you of that incident? Oh, someone leaving me, someone not hearing what I wanted, someone not hearing what I wanted. And then the magic healing question is, and what's different? What's different in you? What's different in them? What's different in the situation? Usually people will say, you know, as a kid, I had no choice. I couldn't pick a different mother or father or change my mother's habits of ignoring what I wanted. And now I'm a grown-up. And actually, if my husband doesn't hear what I said, I can just say it a second time, nicely. You know, I want to say that again. I'm not sure that I was clear in the way I said it to you. Owning it and saying it again. Oh, I have new options now. What else is different? He wants to hear me. He's very loving. He's not like resenting all my life that I was born. So what's the different? Excuse me, what's the same? And that what's different? And the big issue also is it's so different being an adult with choices and options and empowerment from being a kid or whatever is different. Okay, so that's the depth dive for finding deeper concerns. Now, with enough clarity about the concerns, we can go into building solutions. In the case of my client from Czech Republic, her solution was essentially a reframe. The reframe was, you know what? The man I love is such a loving man. He, even though his wife has been dead already for probably 5 years, he still experiences loving feelings. And he's such a faithful man that he still keeps her alive in his mind. Someone who's that loyal, that faithful, that loving, he'll never leave me. So if we marry, I don't have to worry about the woman that's not there anymore. I can share with him his joy and his love, and it doesn't have to trigger that fear that he'll leave me. She was very happy, and I don't know if she went back and called that other therapist who was telling her, just leave him. In any case, we resolved with a win-win solution, a solution responsive to all her concerns, this very troubling life crisis that she had. So I would love feedback from some of you. Where are we on time? Any questions coming in so far?
Yes, we have a couple, and they seem kind of related. Chaya
Okay.
and Jonathan.
Can I hold you on 1 minute? Looking at my notes, I can see that I didn't finish that thought. I'll finish that thought.
Okay.
Then let's go to your questions, okay? So I said the one mistake in stage 1 is not recognizing, oh, this is a time for a win-win waltz, and even worse, telling the client what we think they should do. Problem number 2, 2 mistakes, his concerns and her concerns, 2 separate lists rather than 1 list. And the second mistake is not going broadly and deeply enough into the concerns so you really understand them. That's where we're so fortunate that we have training in both behavioral skills. Right now, we're talking on the behavioral level about a new skill set that not only are you learning, that you'll teach your clients. We're also doing depth exploration. This is an integrative therapy model. Okay, so mistake number 2 is not going deeply enough or asking for enough of the other concerns. 3 mistakes that happen in solutions, finding solutions. 1, I always find kind of funny. It's dependent on if you're a male or a female. If you're a male therapist, you're at risk for not doing enough exploring the underlying concerns and just leaping to solutions. Men tend to like to fix it. If you're female, however, you have another likely mistake, which is you do step 1, you do a beautiful job on step 2, and more on step 2, and more finding the underlying concerns, and you forget to ask them, so what do you want to do about it? What would be an action plan? So I remember a stark moment in my internship when I was co-leading a therapy group with one of the other interns. And we were talking about the session afterwards, and I was talking with him about an incident that had happened that concerned me a lot. And then he turned to me and said, okay, Susan, so what do you want to do about it? I was stunned. It would never in 1,000 years have occurred to me to look for a solution. How am I going to handle that situation differently in the future? And I was very relieved to discover afterwards that that was a sign that I am indeed female, because it turns out that this across a number of cultures tends to hold up as a difference, that men leap to solutions and women tend to get stuck in just exploring and looking for understanding. So don't make that mistake of not going to step 3. That's mistake number 1 on step 3. Mistake number 2 on step 3. How does this sound to you? Well, I think you ought to, well, I would like if you would, no telling each other what to do. This is in a couple's context. It's for him to, or spouse number 1 to look for what they can contribute to the dilemma, and spouse number 2 or individual number 2 to look at what they can contribute to the solution. It's not for either to tell the other what to do. Now, if they get to the end of their problem-solving ideas, and one of them still has an idea that they think would be helpful if the other did it, you can ask, would it be okay if I suggested something for you to do? So that's the difference between barging into someone's house and knocking first. Could I please come in? Because what I do is in my realm of what I'm responsible for, and what you do is in your realm of what you're responsible for. It's not for me to tell you what to do. That's controlling or intrusive behavior. And the same, not for you to tell me what to do. At the same time, after you've done your own, each of them have done their own thinking about what they could add to the solution. If there's still an idea out there, that's a different story. Ask first, not first. And if it's okay, fine. Third mistake people make. Oh, I can think of more than three. Well, I'll say the third one. They forgot to ask a final question, which is, and I suggest you all write this question down. I love this question. Are there any little pieces of this that still feel unfinished? Again, are there any little pieces of this dilemma that still feel unfinished? Now, that is a magic question because I'd say 80 to 90% of the time when I ask that question, it turns out the one crucial piece was not included. So, for instance, I had a couple who was fighting about how much time they spend together, which was close to zero. And they said it's pretty ironic with all this stuck in the home with Corona. We're in the house together all the time, work, kids, everything. And we have less time just for the two of us than we ever did. Their solution was, you know what, we're going to set aside half an hour a day just for the two of us. Are there any little pieces of this that are still unfinished? What do you think the missing piece was? And he said, oh, when are we going to do that? And they laughed because their day was so packed. And then they came up with a creative idea, which is, you know, our kids are pretty old. How about if after dinner, every day we tell them, okay, dinner crew gets to clean up while Dad and I go into our room. They lived in a small apartment. And we're just going to chat and have our connecting time. And I do hope when we come out that the kitchen will be sparkling clean. And then they went back to being with the kids again. Are there any little pieces of this that still feel unfinished? Their solution would not have happened if they hadn't pinpointed a solution to that final piece. Okay. So the three mistakes people make on the third step, they didn't do it at all. They told each other what to do, and they didn't ask the final question, are there any little pieces of this that still feel unfinished? Okay, your questions. Questions from people there, Robert.
Yes, there's a couple of different questions, and they seem to be mostly centered around when you have clients that are very angry, and simply taking a deep breath may not be enough to calm them down. Or what do you do when you have unreasonable clients that don't?
Okay, let's take anger first and then remind me of unreasonable. That's a very interesting one and a tough one. Anger is not in the DSM. Now, is that bizarre or is that bizarre? Anxiety is a pathology. It makes it into the DSM. There's ordinary everyday anxiety, and too much anxiety is an anxiety disorder or panic disorder, or whatever. Depression makes it in. Anger? Really? How many people have excessive anger or use anger where it gets them into trouble instead of solving problems? Huge number of people. So end of my plea to get it into the DSM. Anger is a real problem. Anger immediately throws a stick in the wheel. If you picture a wheel, or a bicycle wheel or whatever, and put a stick in it, the problem solving comes, the forward momentum comes to an immediate halt. It gets replaced by fighting. Fighting is not problem solving. So when you have couples who are doing a lot of fighting, and I may talk more about hot reactors. I had a wonderful case like this quite recently. When you have people who go into fighting mode, the therapist has a big psychoeducational responsibility here to say, fighting is not normal. Fighting is not what everybody does. Now, this is hard in cultures where fighting is normal and it is what everybody does. And still, you can say, look, if everybody you know fights, that still doesn't make it the way to deal with issues. You will be much happier as a couple if instead of fighting, you use anger in a different way. So here's my quick, maybe not so quick, anger spiel. When you begin to feel anger, what's the first aspect of it that you notice, either in you or in the other person? So the first step is to help them recognize what to pay attention to. Could be my voice gets louder, could be she raises her eyebrows, it could be that we get a harsh tone. I'm talking about the early phases of anger. Never mind, oh, we yell swear words at each other, or God forbid, he pushes me against the wall, or worse. So there's all kinds of levels of intensity of anger. You want to help them identify what's the first level of anger. If you can cut anger off at a high level, you can cut it off the same way earlier. I once had a client with a violence problem, and he said, I get so angry that I grab her by the throat and I start choking her, but I'm never going to kill her because as soon as I see that she can't breathe, I let go and I walk out. Come on now, what's wrong with this picture? If you can leave at that point, how about leaving at the first indication that either you or she is beginning to get angry? Now, why either you or she? I explained to them that anger is a lot like fire. If one of you catches fire, the other is highly likely to catch fire. So if you can't notice it in yourself, no problem, notice it in her. Only it's best to notice the signs, my voice is getting louder, or I'm saying the same thing over and over again. So the first piece of anger treatment is to help them learn to recognize it and realize they can cut it off. Now, how do people cut off anger? This is, again, a psychoeducational piece you want to do with them. You want to build choreography for a exit, calm down, re-entry. Oh, 3 pieces again. Exit, disengagement, calm down, re-enter routine. Now, this is one of those areas where it's so bad to do work on the couple's relationship with just one partner. I know of a case where the woman was in individual therapy and she had a husband with a lot of anger. He'd never really been violent, but he would really flare up. So her individual therapist said, look, you have to learn to gracefully exit when he begins to flare up to keep you both safe. Sounds good, right? So she went home, and when he began to flare up, she gracefully exited. He was furious. It triggered all his abandonment anxiety. And for the first time, he grabbed her and threw her. And it happened that he threw her against an open door to a down staircase, and she fell down the stairs and she got all beat up and she got a concussion. That's part of, I rest my case on the importance of doing couples work with both people there. The exit, calm down, re-entry routine needs to be co-choreographed. What are the signs that one of you is going to initiate the exit? As soon as one of you initiates it, how is the other going to respond? Identically. What does an exit for both of you begin with? It begins with your legs, not with your mouth. You stand up, you start walking, and then you have some kind of a code thing that you say very pleasantly, I need to get a drink of water. That's a good code. Other people like some other signal or hand signal, whatever. Only they have to learn to do it simultaneously, because that feeling of being abandoned, for less emotionally healthy people, they become like 2-year-olds with separation anxiety, and they panic and they get furious. So you're going to co-choreograph, what's the verb of that? Co-choreograph a disengagement. Then they each have to figure out how are they going to calm down. So if somebody says it usually, you ask them, how long does it usually take you to calm down? For most people, if they catch it early, like a migraine, it's a few minutes. The longer they waited and the higher the intensity, the longer it will take. So catch it early. And in any case, what are you going to do for your calm down? And some people have no idea how to calm themselves down. Well, I'll go in the other room and then I'll be obsessing. She shouldn't have. Why did she? He has some nerve. So any thinking about the other person, out of bounds, absolutely out of bounds, because it will keep reinvigorating the anger. Instead, they need to preferably have a quiet chair or a place where they like to walk. A quiet chair is a comfortable chair with stuff that they love to do, their favorite magazines, a phone where they can play on the cell phone, a comfortable pillow if they want to close their eyes and breathe deeply, someplace that's nurturing for them. This is not a punishment. By the way, important technique to teach parents to do with children also when they're beginning to get upset. Okay, kids, time for your quiet chairs, and they can happily go to their quiet chairs. Once they're calm, then they re-enter. What do they do when they re-enter? Talk about something trivial. Re-entry starts with putting your big toe in the water of reconnecting. So you just gently try talking about, and we practice finding trivial topics. The weather, the children, something in the room. So right now, just look around the room where you're sitting and find something you could mention. Oh boy, the night looks really dark tonight. It's night here in Israel. Or, oh, I think those chairs, they're leather chairs. I think I need to polish them again or get some leather, something totally neutral and safe. If you hear that you can communicate with each other again in a neutral, safe way, then you can complete the reentry by going back and talking about the topic that was the hot topic. So that was a long answer to a short question. What about anger? You have to teach them disengagement routines. Now, if they have that kind of disengagement routine for strong anger, you also can teach them, if they catch it early enough, to have a quick routine, like just change the topic for a bit. Oh, by the way, did you know that Jimmy came home early from school today? He had a terrible headache. Anything that's a way to exit the topic and the budding fight, and hopefully you both will know, you'll join in both calming down and then make a fresh start. Did that answer the question? Oh, no, it didn't. Because in addition to, in general, giving them a way to get rid of the anger, I myself set a very high standard. I say, given how much anger you've had in your house in the past, I'd suggest you make your home a zero anger home. We just don't do anger. Now, when I say do anger, there's a reason that I put it with a verb. We don't do anger. Anger is there for a purpose. Anger is in itself not bad. It's doing anger, acting anger, speaking angrily that's problematic. What's the purpose of anger? Anger is a messenger, just like anxiety. Anxiety tells you when there's something potentially dangerous ahead. Anger tells you there's something I want that I'm not getting, or there's something I'm getting that I don't want. If someone kicks you, what are you going to feel? You're going to feel a sudden flare of anger. That helps you protect yourself or whatever. If there's something you really want and somebody's saying no and unresponsive, you're likely to begin to feel the anger rise. It's telling you there's something I want, I'm not getting. At that point, once you get the message, what's important to do? So I like the metaphor of anger is a stop sign. What do you do at a stop sign? Now, we were all in first grade or maybe kindergarten at some point. So think back to what they taught you. What do you do at a stop sign? You stop, look, and listen. So you stop the conversation. You look and listen at what's going on here. What do I want that I'm not getting? Not what are they doing, but what do I want that I'm not getting? Or what am I getting that I don't want? And if it's the negative, what am I getting that I don't want? Make sure you follow up with, what do I want? And then the next question is, what would be a more effective way to get what I want than picking up the stop sign and clobbering people with it? Anger is a stop sign. It gives you a message. And then it's for you, once you get the message, to think of a more clever way, like using the win-win waltz to get what you want. Anything left on that question? Great question. Thank you to whoever wrote that question about anger.
They're also asking about when you're dealing with unreasonable people.
Okay. Two things. Almost all people become unreasonable when they begin to feel angry. They stop listening. So what can trigger anger? In addition to the issues, a lack of appropriate skills, I call them collaborative communication skills, for lack of a better word. Anytime there's a deviation from safe driving, safe skills, people will begin to get angry, and then they'll get rigid and stuck on whatever they were stuck on. So what are the deviations? I messages switch to you messages. Any pointing the finger, you did this, you should, any invading the other person's space. You know that any you messages trigger anger, which triggers rigid thinking. Second, listening, lack of listening skills or departure from good listening. How's this one? Robert, can you give me one sentence about anything whatsoever?
The flowers on the table are beautiful.
They may be beautiful, but they're really pretty old and they're half dead. What happened? How did you feel, Robert, when I said that to you?
Well, you turned a positive into a negative.
Exactly. And do you know what word did it? What was my magic word?
Dead. Half dead.
Dead is negative, and even before that,
Okay.
I erased your nice comment by using the word but. But deletes whatever came before. So if you think about mathematics, what's the but sign in math? What deletes what came before? The subtraction sign.
Yes.
Okay, takeaway, dismissive. So but knocks away whatever came before. So you told me there were nice flowers on the table. And when I said, but they're half dead, what happened to the information you put on the table? It went away. That's provocative. And that's going to cause the other person to begin to get irritated and frustrated. In addition, it's another stick in the wheel. There's no forward movement if there's not additive dialogue. Tell me the same sentence again.
Those flowers on the table are beautiful.
Yes. Oh, now we're off to a good start instead of but. Yes. And at the same time, I can see they're beginning to droop. They're beginning to be dead. Can you feel the difference?
Absolutely.
The flowers are beautiful. And now we're adding information. We're building a whole data set of information, as opposed to, and I have an exercise I do with people where I put out one pen on the table and I say, the flowers are beautiful. And then I say, but, and knock it off the table. They're getting dead. And then the other person says, but, and knocks my flowers off. The yellow is still a lovely color, But each time, so if we're both budding, how much data is left on the table? Just one piece. The flowers are beautiful. Yes, they are beautiful, and they're beginning to die. And I think it's the yellow that I like so much. Yes, it's amazing how the yellow seems to get even more intense as they're in their dying phase. I like yellow. The point is that you can do additive dialogue, or you can do argumentative dialogue, knocking the data off. As soon as data is getting knocked off, people rigidify. Okay, now having said that, the question about what if people are rigid is a very serious one, because sometimes, for various reasons, people lock into a fixed data set, belief system. When it's a paranoid system, we call it a paranoid delusional system. There's no, I love this phrase, uptake of non-confirmatory data. I learned that as an intern, and it always stuck with me. When there's a fixed belief system, there's no uptake of non-confirmatory data. So for instance, much of America has a fixed belief system now about global warming and that it's terribly dangerous. There are a bunch of scientists, I forget where they're from, but my husband has been following them, who say, yes, there have been indications of global warming. And at the same time, there's something happening up in the sun and in the atmosphere and with the arrangement of the various entities near the sun that's going to make a next 10 years of serious global cooling. And he's been reading about this for over a year, and they said starting at the beginning of 2021, you're going to see global cooling. So if you have a fixed belief system, or if the newspapers are not willing to publish anything that's not confirmatory to the overall kind of political, it's been politicized. How the weather got politicized, I don't know. But if there's a fixed belief system, this country's going to be in big trouble, because if it's correct that there's global cooling and we haven't been able to uptake that non-confirmatory data, we're not going to be prepared. There's going to be a lot of crops that are ruined because they get frozen. There's going to be a real pressure to get enough heating oil and gas or whatever people heat their houses with, and cutting off gas and oil, which makes lots of sense at a time of global warming, may prove to be disastrous, etc. So there's political global applications to this question of what if people get a fixed belief system and with rigid walls around it and are not willing to uptake new information. It can be very dangerous. Third, any questions on that? Or
I don't think so.
Okay, so the third thing to be aware of is there are some very lovely people who have, I love the term, cognitive rigidity. It's just very hard for them to turn the corner from one set of assumptions and beliefs. I want to go out for dinner, and change that. If she's been sitting there planning going out for dinner, and then her husband comes in and says, I don't want to go out for dinner, it's very hard for her to turn that corner. So cognitive rigidity is common sometimes with people with Asperger's. Once they've locked on a belief, it's just really hard to switch. And there are other people also who, for one reason or another, have cognitive rigidity. Interestingly, in working with couples, if you can explain this to them in a good humored way and say, hey, some people are like acrobats, they have great cognitive flexibility. They had one thought and they take in new data and it goes to something else. And other people have more cognitive rigidity. At different times, each can be helpful. And you need to know that you two differ in that regard and just be able to work with it. So the person who's more flexible needs to keep the emotional tone down, not get irritated, and just help bit by bit the person who has the more cognitively rigid system to laugh and relax and smile, and then they'll be able to be a little bit more fluid or flexible.
We've got a few other questions. Joel's asking if you can elaborate on a technique for doing a depth dive.
What I'd like to do is recommend that you go to prescriptionswithoutpills.com. And there's a number of subheadings: anxiety, depression, etc. I think most of them have the example, a video example of the depth dive, but under the title of That Was Then, This Is Now. So on the video, maybe you can go to YouTube. I don't know if it's on YouTube or not. That Was Then, This Is Now. I explain the steps in the depth dive and at the same time demo it. So I think that will be more helpful than trying to go through it again now. It's very important technique.
Mm-hmm.
You got another question?
Yes,
I have another answer.
Well,
okay, good. Give me the question.
Okay, can you amplify why you recommend one therapist for all or any family members? What are the exceptions to one therapist for all family members?
The big problem with one therapist for all family members is our profession has not caught on that couples are important. So most people who go through graduate school training do not get enough training in how to do couples therapy. It's okay, all is not lost. There are plenty of training materials out there now. Of course, I like to recommend my book, From Conflict to Resolution, and the video that I did already, maybe 20 years ago, almost 15 or 20 years, called The Angry Couple. There was a publisher in New York who put a lot of money into a series of videos by people who are writing their names that you would be familiar with. But she had read my book, From Conflict to Resolution, and at the time I had an audio tape called Working with Couples in Conflict. And she said, I know that you're totally unknown, and if I were going to get couples therapy, that's what I want for couples therapy. So she had me do it was a, what do you call it? What's the word for famous therapists series of how to do each of the main tasks we do in couples therapy. Anyway, so she had, when I say put a lot of money into it, there were 3 cameras, there was a director, they hired excellent actors. They actually auditioned over 100 actors for the man and for the woman for this. It's an excellent video. It's called The Angry Couple. You can get it at psychotherapy.net. And you can just stream it from there. The Angry Couple, Susan Heitler. If you Google The Angry Couple, Susan Heitler, you'll get to that site. Now, why was I saying that? What was the question I was answering? Oh, I was saying that most people have not had enough training in doing couples therapy. So if they're an individual therapist and their client wants to talk about their marriage, they talk with them. Bad. It's like someone who knows how to treat the heart, knowing nothing about the lungs. And therefore they make their changes on the heart, but they don't realize that it's destroying the lungs. Or you think of the example I gave of that well-intentioned therapist who taught her client to walk out of the room. It's dangerous, counterproductive, and from my perspective, totally unethical to treat marital issues in an individual therapy context. Now, that doesn't mean every time it's problematic. There are some therapists who are able to keep the focus on their client and can do some depth exploration that helps their client understand why they're so reactive on their core concerns. At the same time, if the spouse was in the room while you're doing that work with that individual, they switch from being annoyed at that person for always flaring up or whatever they do when their trigger is hit, to being compassionate. And number two, they can have a role in helping the person who has the core concern. And number three, you can find out, okay, so what symmetrically are your core concerns that cause you to flare up or get depressed or whatever. And then you can do like Paul Wachtel talks about, identify the vicious cycle where they hook each other. And remember, step three, you're going to look for solutions. Okay, so next time one of you hears one of these core concerns being triggered, what's your new plan of action going to be? And that's how you transform couples from being a fragile and turbulent couple to being strong, loving, consistently safe with each other. So you don't transform couples by working with just one piece, just like you don't make a healthy person by only looking at his heart without looking at the rest of his systems. That's my mission, is to convey that to the world of psychotherapy. And again, I want to say that I've written a paper that was actually turned down by a journal. And I think it's just had too much in it. They said I tried to do too much in one paper, and I think they were right. That paper is available, though, if you go to researchgate.com. It's called something like Ethical Issues Working with Married People.
We have another question, and I think you may have dealt with it since she's written this. It's Jennifer, and she said, as a marriage and family therapist, I was trained that when working with a couple to refer out to individual therapy and not to see them individually. Can you say more about why you recommend one therapist manage all the dynamics?
You need the data about what you find in the depth dive. You need, and the spouse needs that data in order to re-choreograph. Absolutely. Read the paper again. Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, for asking that question. It's in both directions that we just have a mistaken conception. So I think people were well-intended when they thought, oh, conflict of interest, is that what it's called? Dual roles, what's the term? Something like that. It would be a dual role if you are both the individual and the couple therapist. No, from a systems perspective, you are the therapist. You're being the therapist when you work with him, the therapist when you work with her, the therapist when, or him and him, just to be more politically correct. And when you work with them as a pair, you're still the therapist. It's one role. The dual role is if you're the therapist and you're also coaching their son on the soccer team. That's a dual role. Or it's a dual role if you mention to them one day, by the way, I've been investing in a company and I'd love to see you guys invest there too.
I think what you're saying too is dual relationship.
Dual relationship. Thank you very much.
Very similar. Yeah.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
So welcome.
Are there more questions? I have another topic that I want to go into that I said I would cover. It's in one of the 3 objectives.
Well, I'll read the question. You can see if you want to address it now or later. Do you approach conflict resolution with non-relational groups the same way as couples? Example, conflict among neighbors or residents in the same community.
I love that question. Absolutely. One of the very fun uses I've had of this is I was hired by the Denver School Board at one point because they had 2 warring sides, and I came in to help them calm it down. And it was interesting. It was very effective, and they began working very collaborative with each other. And then for some reason, one of the unions or something thought, oh no, we're not going to get what we want. And they made a big fuss about it, and then they had to stop. It was very sad because absolutely, whether it's in the business world, with your neighbor, between parents and kids, between kids, I had to laugh. My 7-year-old grandson the other day was playing with his friends, and they began fighting. And he said to his friend, Well, what are your underlying concerns? I thought, oh, his mother is a psychologist, and she actually co-wrote the Power of Two workbook with me. So he's grown up with this terminology. So even between kids, it's the same phenomenon.
So
Another
you use a
question.
lot of the same techniques.
Well, it's age adaptable. And I will say, if you or one person in a disagreement has these skills, the odds zoom up that they can guide the steps of conflict resolution, the win-win waltz. So the other thing I wanted to make sure to cover, because it's one of the objectives of the talk, is what happens if people don't know the win-win waltz? What are the other options? So one alternative to win-win is win-lose. One person dominates, the other person folds. What's going to happen then? First of all, how do you dominate? You get louder, you talk faster, or you're bigger and stronger, or you have more prestige or more whatever, and more persistence. So eventually the other person folds. Now, what's the price of that? Number one, the solutions are less good. Number two, how is the person who folded going to feel? We have a recipe for depression. If you want more on that topic, Google Susan Heitler TEDx talk or TEDx talk Lift Depression, and it shows a technique that's essentially a category of win-win waltz, but the special category of using that technique when one partner is depressed. If we have time, I'll give you the overview. How are we doing?
Well, we've got about a little more than 10 minutes left in our 90-minute talk.
And are there more questions there, or can I?
There is one more question.
Just to finish the issue of if there's a winner and a loser, the person who lost is going to feel depressed. And the person who won will win the battle and lose the war.
All right. So the last question right at the moment.
Sorry, Robert. I think on the sheet that you sent out, and what about lose-lose? That was another question. What's the formula for lose-lose? This is why I hate compromise. Lose-lose is a compromise is a lose-lose situation. Both people have lost something of importance to them. So for instance, if I want to live in Denver and my spouse wants to live in New York City, a compromise would be Kansas City. It doesn't work. We both lost. Or if I want to sell my car for $5,000 and you're willing to buy it for $1,000, meeting somewhere halfway between leaves me with not enough money for what I needed that $5,000 for, and leaves you with a bigger bill than you can afford. It's lose-lose. So compromise is a lose-lose. Not always, every now and again, by compromising, you can get some stuff done. It's not a good model for how to make decisions together. Yes, your question.
Well, on a TED Talk, you use a technique termed powering up. Can you say if you coined that term or where it comes from and anything more about how it works?
Okay, powering up. I think the way I used it is when someone has lost, caved in, and they then feel depressed. You can tell they feel depressed because if you ask them to picture who they're mad at or what they're mad at and describe that interaction, then you ask them, who looks bigger, you or them? They will say, I look small, they look big. If there's not a size discrepancy like that, it's not depression that you're dealing with, or else that's not the incident that triggered the depression. So then when people are depressed, they can't think of solutions. They may be able to come up with their concerns. Oops, I don't see where I put my fancy face drawing. Yes. they may be able to identify what the problem was, maybe, and say their concerns. But when you feel small, you just, like a child looking up at grown-ups, you can't think of anything you could do to make the situation better. So I think the way I use the term is I have people, oh, take a deep breath, and with each breath, feel yourself, their eyes are closed, growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they're quite a bit bigger than the other person in the imagery. From that position, I ask, what can you see that you didn't see before? And then they begin to see, you know, this, that, whatever. And with that additional data, so what opportunities, what new options does that open up for you? So that's a visualization technique that adds to the basic win-win waltz, initially pulling them out of the depressive little stage and powering them up so they're in a position where they have enough sense of internal empowerment to do the win-win waltz, either with someone else or in their own problem solving. Do we have time? Is there another question, or I can give one other concept? Go ahead.
Yeah, there aren't any other questions at the moment. We've got about 6 more minutes.
Great, amazing. And let me check my notes to make sure that yes. So here's the one piece that was missing. We talked about the face, right? The face map. So there's another map that I call the hand map that explains the connection of conflict resolution and poor conflict resolution to a huge amount of the psychopathology we're dealing with as therapists. Here goes. And you can use this. I give you, there's no copyright on this. I give you total permission to use the same image to explain to your clients what's going on with them. So we're going down the road of life, and then boom, we hit a bump. What's a bump? A bump is a dilemma, a problem, a conflict, an issue. All those words that at the beginning of the session we said, I lump into a basket that I call conflict. Once there is a conflict, what are your options? Oh, here's the map. You can take fight road to dominate over. Odds are you win what you want, except there's a cost. How do you win what you want? Often you have to power yourself with anger. So fight road is powered with anger, and the goal is to dominate or win. Sound appealing? It's very appealing to many people. It's ineffective and it destroys relationships. So if you don't want to take fight road, so maybe you'll take fold road. What do you feel if you've gone down fold road and caved in and let the stronger person have what they want? As I said before, that's the road that leads to depression and feeling small and powerless and hopeless, etc. So let's back up. We don't want to take that road. Here, let's take this road. This is freeze road. Freeze, what freezes? Your thinking freezes. So you're still walking and talking, but your thinking has become like a deer in headlights. It froze, or it froze in a pattern. I want to, I don't want to, I want to, I don't want to. I want to leave him, I love him. I want to leave him, I love him. She was frozen in a highly anxious state. So when your thinking freezes, you're still aware of the problem. So that perpetuates anxiety. Now we have anxiety. We understand how depression comes about. We understand the purpose of anger. What's this route? That's the flee route. Fight, fold, freeze, or flee. Just stop off at the bar, and then you won't have to worry about anything. It's a distraction route. I once had a client, I love this woman. She happened to have a lot of money. So whenever anything happened that distressed her, she'd immediately go to the airport and take a plane to somewhere far away. That was the most extreme version of flee that I had ever seen. People also flee with obsessive compulsive disorders. They become very obsessive or very compulsive. So now if they've gone down these roads, what do? Oh, fortunately, there's also from the bump the thumb root. The thumb root is another F word. I had to find an F word. So I used find solutions. Oh, do the win-win waltz, figure out all the concerns, all the parameters of the issue, the factors involved, and find a plan of action. Remember to go to step 3 and actually find a plan of action. If you take the thumb root, you tootle around back into the realm of well-being until you hit the next bump. So it's like a definition of mental health. People who mostly live their lives in the realm of well-being know the win-win waltz, whether they label that or not. They problem solve whenever they hit a life bump. They talk quietly with the other person if it's an interpersonal life bump, and they understand the concerns and come out with a solution that works very well for both of them. And then if further problems come up, they talk again and do some more win-win waltz to modify the solution. And that's the recipe for a life of well-being, basically. Now, it happens that if you've gone down those roads and you're stuck in a state of too much anger, those are the techniques we talked about earlier. You have to learn how to back off of that road to be able to do the win-win waltz. If you've gone down fold road, you have to learn to re-empower. And that's where that TEDx talk is helpful. Or if you go to Prescriptions Without Pills, click depression and there's more information on that. This is Prescriptions Without Pills is the name of my most recent book that writes about all these things. And in addition, there's a free website that has some videos and some handouts. Oh, speaking of which, well, I'll just say with anxiety also, you have to get rid of the anxiety in order to back people up, unfreeze their thinking, and then they can do the win-win waltz. An interesting thing, by the way, I can't resist saying about people whose thinking freezes, it hasn't occurred to them that you can find solutions to problems. So once they hit a problem, what if, they get stuck, or that's scary, and they tend not to go into solutions. So as therapists, it's important to be aware of that and guide them through in their thinking to actually coming up with solutions. And alcoholism, stopping off at the bar, that's another whole set of techniques that I won't go into now. I was going to say, though, what was I going to say? Do you remember help me out here, read my mind.
Talk about one of your resources.
Yes, I think that was it. We're getting close. Yeah. Come on, we can do it. Go ahead.
It had something to do, I think, one of the resources maybe in your website or something that tool that people use.
Let's assume that that's so. I do want to, on the one hand, I don't want to advertise my stuff. On the other hand, when I'm working with couples, you have to teach them all these skills. There's a lot of behavioral components. You can dish them out teaspoon by teaspoon. In addition, if you want to give them homework, reading, and practice exercises, the process goes so much faster. So if you're feeling overloaded, or you want them to get better sooner or to really learn this stuff, you need to refer them to where they can learn these skill sets, including the win-win waltz. Oh, now I remembered the piece I forgot. I'll remember it this time. So there's the free resource of the materials on prescriptionswithoutpills.com. There's a wonderful internet site that takes what I wrote about in the books and makes it a fun, interactive learning experience. Power of Two, TWO, marriage.com. If they just go to powerof2.com, you get a Christian rock group. Fun to listen to, just won't teach you the skills. So powerof2marriage.com, or the book or the workbook, The Power of Two. Now, the piece that I remember now, thank you, Kay, for your help with this, is if you go to Prescriptions Without Pills, which is the website illustrating the book, Prescriptions Without Pills, that explains all these techniques, how you get depressed, how you undepress, etc. There are handouts. So if you go to the relationship section under prescriptionswithoutpills.com, there's a handout of the face map. It's not going to look exactly like this. This is a rough map. The one there is more like a handout you would want to give to clients. And it details it. And you're welcome to print it out, hand it out. So it says the win-win walls. I will say when you click it, it looks like I'm not getting the page. What it does when you click it is download the handout. So you have to go to your downloads and print out from there.
Wonderful.
You're welcome.
Susan. And we're just about running out of some time here, but I just want to thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
So many positive comments, in our chat, in the Q&A, and this is just the beginning. And it's just so helpful when you use, I love how you used practical situations that you've encountered with your clients, and
Yeah.
all of the, the tools that people can go and the different resources for handouts. So thank you so much today for being a part of this. We really appreciate this, and we appreciate your participation being on the National Registry of Marriage Friendly
Well,
Therapists.
I am so appreciative of you for having me come. It kind of makes me cry a little bit because I'm getting older and I know all this stuff, but I want to share it. So thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Well, maybe we'll see if we can have you come back again when you're in Colorado, Susan. And thank you. So,
and I'm always glad to broadcast from Israel. So,
all right, wonderful. And for those of you who we invited people on the registry today, and maybe some of you who are not on our registry, we would really love it if you could, I put Robert's contact information, or go on to www.marriagefriendlytherapist.com. That's plural. And we have a plethora. We have so many people that have contacted us wanting a therapist on our registry. And we would love to have more people come on board. Please let us know if you have any questions. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day. And Susan, you enjoy yourself in Israel. Have a safe return back here. And thank you all of you for participating. And thanks, Rob, for helping out.
Thank you, Susan.
thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
You are so welcome. Thank you.